Comerford.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and through you to our colleagues. Mr. President, I rise in strong support of this budget proposal. First and foremost, I am grateful to our Senate President and to our Chair of Ways and Means and their tireless teams for the thoughtful, diligent, and compassionate work evident in this budget before us. The Chair of Ways and Means started his remarks with a quote, and I loved that quote, and it made me think of a quote that I love about budgets. I attribute it to Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who serves ably this nation, and she is often quoted as saying, budgets are moral documents. They represent our values in numbers. And I believe that this budget represents, in large part, the values of this Senate. The Chair of Ways and Means, the Senate President, their team have prepared a steadfast budget. Now, I wrote that steadfast in this remark before I heard the steadfast, the word steadfast echoed again and again between the Minority Leader and the Chair of Ways and Means. I do think, for me, it is a resonant word given the volatility at the national level. As my colleagues know, the suffering in all corners of the Commonwealth is profound. Constituents are afraid for their safety, terrified for their families, their friends, their neighbors. They're worried about retaining their health care, their jobs, and their food security. Nonprofits, campuses, farms, and small businesses are compromised because of federal cuts and rising tariff-related costs. Equal to the current suffering and chaos is the dread and anxiety of what may come next, as more cuts and potential recession impacts loom on the horizon. The investments that this budget makes in our people, in our institutions, in our communities, could not be more timely. As the federal government right now debates the fate of Medicaid, we are leaning in to mass health, again and again leaning in to health care security for our people. As the federal government cuts funding for higher education, the Senate retains our commitment to universally free community college, which has been wildly successful at increasing college enrollment and expanding opportunity. This budget would expand that work even further and pilot free tuition for those interested in serving communities as paramedics or EMTs, breaking down the barrier even more thoroughly while meeting a dire need in our municipalities. The Senate also makes record investments, as the Chair said, in state colleges and universities and the University of Massachusetts, with more than $275 million proposed for financial aid. And on top of that, we continue funding for the aptly named Success Program, which helps community college and state university students persist and complete their degrees by providing needed wraparound services. We're adding to our investment of affordability and saying, yes, we want you to come here, but we want you to do more than that. We want you to get a degree. We need you to get a degree. As the federal government cuts funding for food banks and for our farms, this budget restores full funding for the Healthy Incentives Program so that SNAP-eligible families will have a restored monthly benefit to spend on locally grown produce. As many of my colleagues know, HIP is a win-win-win, friends. It's a win for people who need and deserve food security. It's a win for our farmers who lose money for every dollar they spend, and it's a win for local economies. So we're leaning in to the Healthy Incentives Program. It allocates $15.5 million for Women, Infant, and Children Nutrition Program, that's WIC. It fully funds universally free breakfast and lunch at school, and many of these schools are themselves going to local farmers to help bring the local food into the school as part of this program. And it is, as the Chair said, increasing funding for transitional aid to families with dependent children, or TAFDC, and of course the emergency aid to elderly and disabled and children, or EADC. Those are anti-poverty programs. As our municipalities grapple with rising costs and impossibly tight budgets, the Senate is investing more in unrestricted local aid. That's by $28.7 million more than we did last year, for a total of over $1.3 billion. We also grow our commitment to payments in lieu of taxes for state-owned land, which is particularly needed in my district, where 23% of the land is state-owned. We include $52.4 million for libraries, $9 million for local public health. We fund councils on aging, and we restore co-responder funding while ensuring that training for police officers remains level. And throughout this budget, regional equity is a central theme, making sure that funding works for and lifts up the entire Commonwealth. This budget includes a dashboard tracker for funding for housing development and housing productions. And I want to thank the Senate Pro Tem, Senator Brownsberger, for his work along with the Senate Chair of Ways and Means to ensure that funding and production happens equitably across the state. And that is, of course, critical, as the Chair said earlier, in the wake of the Affordable Homes Act. In K-12 education, we lead with $16 million for rural aid and a record $150 per student increase in minimum aid. And we cannot forget, of course, special education circuit breaker. And here I want to also remind us, and I know we all know this, that in our fair share supplemental budget, the Senate leaned in with record amounts for student special education circuit breaker funding. So here again in the budget, we say to our municipalities, we know this cost is hard for you to bear, and we are going to be with you. In transportation, we propose a record $214 million for regional transit authorities while maintaining a fare free access for our constituents. And with regard to unrestricted local aid, this budget includes the promise of a commission to study the distribution and maximize equity. Mr. President, we're looking forward to a robust debate, so I'll stop here. Thank you to my colleagues who have filed important amendments for consideration. Thank you to all of the local officials, constituents, and advocates who have helped guide my own efforts on this budget. This budget fortifies our lines of defense in the Commonwealth to shield our people from the worst consequences of current federal actions. It keeps us moving forward during a volatile, dangerous, and uncertain time to ensure that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is always a place where everyone has equal opportunity to thrive. Thank you, Mr. President.